The earth was still fresh over the small grave when Beatrice Zimmerman felt her knees give way on the hillside overlooking Truckee, California. And she knew with terrible certainty that she would never rise from this spot again. It was late September of 1878, and the Sierra Nevada mountains were beginning their slow transformation from summer gold to autumn copper. The air carried the sharp scent of pine and the promise of the winter snows that would soon bury this high mountain town in white silence. Beatrice had been sitting beside her daughter's grave for 3 days now, barely moving except to shift her weight when her legs went numb. She had stopped eating on the second day. She had stopped crying sometime during the first night when her body simply had no more tears to give. Now she just sat, her dark blonde hair hanging loose and tangled around her shoulders, her green eyes fixed on the wooden cross that her husband had hammered into the ground before he left. Samuel had left that very afternoon after the burial, his face hard as granite, his eyes refusing to meet hers. He had packed his things while she stood in the doorway of their small house on the edge of town, watching him move through the rooms like a stranger. He did not say goodbye. He did not say he was sorry. He simply mounted his horse and rode east toward Nevada, leaving her alone with a grave on a hill, and a silence so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. Little Emma had been 4 years old when the fever took her. 4 years of bright laughter and sticky hands and questions that tumbled out faster than Beatrice could answer them. 4 years of braiding fine brown hair and singing lullabies and feeling like maybe, just maybe, life could be gentle after all. The fever had come on fast in early September, turning Emma's cheeks bright red and her small body hot as a coal stove. Beatrice had tried everything the doctor suggested and several things he had not. She had sponged her daughter's forehead with cool water, had forced spoonfuls of medicine between cracked lips, had prayed until her voice went hoarse. None of it mattered. Emma died on a Tuesday morning while Beatrice held her, the little girl's last breath so soft it barely stirred the air. Now it was Friday, and Beatrice had not moved from the hillside since Wednesday. She knew people from town had come by. She had heard their voices calling her name, felt their hands on her shoulders trying to coax her to stand. But she could not make herself respond. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, some hollow thing that had once held life, but now contained only the vast and terrible absence of her child. The sun was starting its descent behind the western peaks when she heard the footsteps approaching through the dry grass. She did not turn to look. Another well-meaning neighbor come to tell her that she needed to eat, that she needed to rest, that Emma was in a better place now. As if any place could be better than here in her mother's arms, the footsteps stopped a few feet away. Beatrice waited for the voice, the platitudes, the awkward attempts at comfort. Instead, she heard the soft creak of leather and the rustle of someone settling onto the ground. Then, nothing. Just the sound of the wind moving through the pines and the distant call of a hawk riding the thermals above the valley. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Beatrice had lost her ability to measure time, but whoever had sat down near her grave showed no signs of leaving and made no attempt to speak. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It simply existed, like the rocks and the trees and the vast indifference of the mountains. Finally, as the sun touched the ridgeline and sent long shadows stretching across the hillside, Beatrice turned her head. A man sat about 10 feet from her, his back against a ponderosa pine, his long legs stretched out in front of him. He wore the practical clothes of someone who spent his life outdoors. Worn leather chaps over canvas pants, a faded blue shirt, a brown vest that had seen better days. His hat sat on the ground beside him, revealing dark brown hair that needed cutting and a face that looked to be somewhere in his late 20s. He was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the valley below, where the Truckee River wound like a silver thread through the gathering dusk. "You planning to sit here until the snow comes?" Beatrice's voice came out rough and cracked from disuse. The man did not turn his head. "I was thinking about it. This is my spot. Big enough for two, I reckon." Beatrice felt a flicker of something that might have been irritation, the first real emotion she had experienced in days. "I do not want company." "Neither do I," the man said. His voice was low and measured, with the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas or maybe Oklahoma. "That is why I came up here. Heard it was a good place to be alone." Despite everything, Beatrice felt her mouth twitch. It was not quite a smile, but it was close enough to startle her. "You heard wrong. Appears so." The man finally turned to look at her. His eyes were a striking blue, the color of the sky just after dawn. There was no pity in them, no careful sympathy, just a direct gaze that seemed to see her without needing to look away. "Name is Thomas Fletcher. Most people call me Fletcher. Beatrice Zimmerman." She hesitated, then added, "Most people call me B." Fletcher nodded once as if filing this information away, then returned his attention to the valley. They sat in silence as the sun disappeared, and the first stars began to prick through the darkening sky. The temperature dropped quickly at this elevation, and Beatrice felt herself start to shiver in her thin cotton dress. She had not thought to bring a shawl when she climbed this hill 3 days ago. She had not thought she would need one. Without a word, Fletcher stood and walked to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that Beatrice had not noticed grazing nearby. He pulled a bedroll from behind his saddle, returned to his spot by the tree, and tossed a wool blanket in her direction. It landed in the grass between them. "I am fine," Beatrice said. "Suit yourself." Fletcher wrapped his own blanket around his shoulders and leaned back against the tree trunk. Beatrice lasted another 10 minutes before the cold overcame her stubbornness. She reached for the blanket and pulled it around herself, hating that it helped, hating even more that it smelled like leather and campfire smoke, and something indefinably masculine that made her throat tighten with an emotion she could not name. "Thank you," she said quietly. Fletcher made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. The moon rose fat and silver over the eastern mountains, washing the hillside in pale light. Beatrice could see Emma's grave clearly in the ghostly illumination, the disturbed earth still raw and obvious against the weathered grass around it. "How old was she?" Fletcher asked. Beatrice flinched. "How did you know?" "Small grave. Toy rabbit sitting on top of the cross." Did not take much figuring. 4. The word came out barely above a whisper. She was 4 years old. Her name was Emma. Fletcher nodded slowly. He was quiet for a long moment, and Beatrice thought that would be the end of it. But then he spoke again, his voice so low she almost missed it. "Mine was 6. His name was Daniel." Beatrice turned to stare at him. Fletcher was still looking at the valley, but his jaw was tight and his hands were clenched into fists on his thighs. "You had a son, had." The word was sharp as broken glass. 3 years ago. I was working cattle down in the San Joaquin Valley, and my wife wrote that Danny had taken sick. By the time I got home to Sacramento, he had been dead for a week. They buried him without me because the ground was soft and they could not wait in the heat. The pain in his voice was so raw, so immediate, that it might have been yesterday instead of 3 years ago. Beatrice felt something crack open in her chest, some small fissure in the wall of ice that had formed around her heart. "I am sorry," she said, and meant it. Fletcher shrugged, but the gesture was stiff and unconvincing. "Fever, same as yours, I reckon. Doctors could not do anything but stand there looking important and charging money we did not have. My wife held him while he died. She wrote that his last words were asking when Papa was coming home." He stopped, his throat working. I was herding cattle 300 miles away while my boy was calling for me. You could not have known. Does not matter, I was not there. Fletcher's voice was flat now, drained of emotion. My wife never forgave me. She is still in Sacramento, living with her sister. We are still married on paper, but I have not seen her in 2 years. Last I heard, she does not speak my name anymore. They sat with that confession hanging between them while an owl called from somewhere in the darkness. Beatrice pulled the blanket tighter around herself, no longer feeling quite so alone on this hillside. Here was someone who understood, someone who knew what it meant to have your entire world reduced to a small grave and a collection of memories that cut like knives every time you touch them. My husband left, she heard herself say. The same day we buried Emma, he did not say a word, just packed his things and rode away. I think he blamed me. I was the one taking care of her. I was the one who was supposed to keep her safe. And you blame yourself, Fletcher said. It was not a question. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes for the first time in days. Every minute of every day, I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently, should have called the doctor sooner, should have tried different medicines, should have prayed harder. Should have. Her voice broke on the last word. But none of it matters because she is still in the ground and I am still up here and nothing I do will ever bring her back. No, Fletcher agreed quietly. It will not. The honesty of it, the complete lack of false comfort, somehow made it easier to breathe. Beatrice had spent the last few days listening to people tell her that time would heal this wound, that God had a plan, that Emma was an angel in heaven now. All lies, or if not lies, then truths so distant and abstract they offered no comfort at all. But Fletcher was not offering comfort. He was just sitting here in the dark, carrying his own grief, making no promises that could not be kept. "Does it get easier?" she asked. Fletcher considered this for a long time. "No," he finally said. "But you get stronger at carrying it. The weight does not change, but your back gets used to the load. Some days you can almost forget it is there. Other days it crushes you flat, and you wonder why you bother getting up at all. But you do. You get up. You keep moving. Because the alternative is to lay down and die, and my boy would not have wanted that for me. Your girl would not want it for you." Beatrice thought about Emma, about her bright laugh and her endless curiosity, and the way she would throw her small arms around Beatrice's neck and squeeze with all her might. Emma, who loved wildflowers and butterflies, and the way the sun looked when it came through the windows in the morning. Emma, who was afraid of spiders but fearless around horses. Emma, who had squeezed Beatrice's hand in those final moments and whispered that she loved her mama. "No," Beatrice whispered. She would not. They sat together through the night. Sometimes they talked in quiet voices about their children, sharing memories like treasures pulled from a locked chest. Fletcher told her about teaching Danny to ride, about the boy's gap-toothed grin when he finally managed to stay in the saddle without help. Beatrice told him about Emma's questions, the endless stream of whys and hows and whats that drove her mad but that she would give anything to hear again. Sometimes they sat in silence, comfortable now in each other's presence, two wounded creatures finding unexpected shelter in shared pain. When the sky began to lighten in the east, Fletcher stood and stretched, his joints cracking. "You planning to go home today?" Beatrice looked at Emma's grave, at the small mound of earth that held everything she had loved most in the world. The thought of leaving felt impossible. But so did staying. She was cold and hungry and exhausted, and some small part of her that had not died with her daughter knew that she could not remain on this hillside forever. "I do not know if I can," she admitted. Fletcher held out his hand. "One step, that is all you have to do. Just take one step toward home. Then tomorrow you can worry about the next one." Beatrice stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached up and grasped it. His palm was calloused and warm, and his grip was steady as he pulled her to her feet. Her legs were stiff and unsteady from 3 days of sitting, and she would have fallen if Fletcher had not caught her elbow. "Easy," he said. "Take your time." They stood there for a moment while Beatrice found her balance. Then she took one shaky step away from the grave, then another. Each step felt like betrayal, like abandoning Emma all over again. But Fletcher was right. Emma would not want her to die up here. Emma would want her mama to keep living, to find some way to carry on even when it seemed impossible. Fletcher walked beside her down the hillside, not touching her but close enough that she knew he would catch her if she fell. His horse followed behind them, trailing its reins. When they reached the outskirts of town, Beatrice stopped and turned to look back up the hill. She could just make out the small cross among the trees. "I will come back tomorrow," she said. It was both a promise and a prayer. "I know," Fletcher said. They walked through the quiet streets of Truckee as the town began to wake. Smoke rose from chimneys, and somewhere a rooster was crowing. The train depot at the center of town was already bustling with activity as workers prepared for the morning arrivals. Truckee had grown quickly since the Transcontinental Railroad had come through, transforming from a small logging settlement into a bustling supply hub for the mining towns scattered throughout the Sierra Nevada. The streets were a mix of permanent wooden structures and temporary canvas tents, and the population swelled and shrank with the seasons, and the fortunes of the silver strikes to the east. Beatrice's house was on the northern edge of town, a small wooden structure that Samuel had built when they first arrived 2 years ago. He had been working as a carpenter then, finding steady employment in a town that was constantly building. The house had 2 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and a smaller bedroom. It had seemed like a palace when they moved in, a real home after years of moving from place to place following work. Now it just felt empty. Fletcher stopped at the gate of her small yard. "You going to be all right?" Beatrice almost laughed at the question. She would never be all right again, but she knew what he meant. "I will manage. I am staying at the boarding house on Main Street, Mrs. Patterson's place. You need anything, you come find me." "Why are you in Truckee?" Beatrice asked, realizing she had never thought to wonder. "Looking for work. Heard they were hiring at the lumber mill. Figure I will stick around through winter, save up some money, then head north come spring." He paused, his blue eyes searching her face. "But I can change those plans if need be." Beatrice felt something warm unfurl in her chest. This stranger who had sat with her through the night, who had shared his pain and helped her find the strength to leave her daughter's grave, was offering to stay, to be there if she needed him. It was more than her own husband had offered. "Thank you," she said, "for last night, for understanding." Fletcher nodded once, then turned to go. Beatrice watched him walk away, leading his horse down the dusty street before she turned and entered her house. The interior was exactly as she had left it 3 days ago. Dishes still sat in the wash basin. Emma's small collection of toys still lay scattered in the corner. The bed she had shared with Samuel was unmade, the quilts tangled from his hasty packing. Beatrice stood in the center of the room and felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her. This house that had once been filled with Emma's laughter and chatter now held only ghosts and memories. For a moment, the urge to turn around and run back up the hillside was almost overwhelming. But she could still feel the warmth of Fletcher's hand in hers, could still hear his voice saying just take one step. So she took one step, then another. She walked to the wash basin and began to clean the dishes. Then she swept the floor. Then she made the bed. Small tasks, simple things, each one a tiny act of defiance against the darkness that threatened to consume her. She did not think about tomorrow or next week or how she would survive the winter without Samuel's income. She just focused on the next task, the next step, the next breath. She was reheating some soup when she heard a knock at the door. Opening it, she found Mary Patterson, the owner of the boarding house where Fletcher was staying. Mary was a stout woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that had made her a successful businesswoman in a town full of rough men. "B. Zimmerman," Mary said without preamble, "I brought you some bread and butter, and before you tell me you are fine, save your breath. You look like death warmed over and you need to eat." Despite everything, Beatrice felt her lips twitch. Mary had never been one for gentle sympathies. "Thank you, Mary." Mary pushed past her into the house, setting a basket on the table. "I also came to tell you that if you need work, I could use help at the boarding house. Laundry, cooking, cleaning rooms. It is hard work, but it pays fair and you can start whenever you are ready." Beatrice stared at her. "You are offering me a job. You got a better plan for how you are going to eat this winter?" Mary asked bluntly. "Samuel is gone and I doubt he is sending money back. You need work and I need help. Seems simple enough to me." It was simple, painfully so. Beatrice had been so lost in her grief that she had not thought about practical matters like food and rent. But Mary was right. She needed to survive, which meant she needed money. "When can I start?" Beatrice asked. "Monday. Come by at sunrise. I will show you what needs doing." Mary headed for the door, then paused. "That new boarder I got, Fletcher. He is the one who came and told me you were back home. Asked me to check on you. Seems like a decent sort." After Mary left, Beatrice sat at her table and ate the bread and butter, forcing herself to chew and swallow even though the food tasted like ashes in her mouth. Fletcher had sent Mary to check on her. This man she had only met last night, who owed her nothing, who was carrying his own crushing grief, had still thought to make sure she was not alone. The days began to take on a rhythm. Beatrice would wake before dawn and walk to Mary's boarding house, where she would spend the day washing linens, preparing meals, and scrubbing floors. The work was hard and left her exhausted, but she was grateful for it. It gave her something to focus on besides the aching absence of her daughter. In the evenings, she would return to her empty house, eat whatever simple meal she could manage, and then climb the hill to sit by Emma's grave until the cold drove her home. Fletcher was often at the boarding house when she arrived in the mornings. He had taken a job at the lumber mill as he had planned, working long shifts cutting and hauling timber from the surrounding forests. The work was dangerous and backbreaking, and he usually came back covered in sawdust and pine sap, his hands scraped raw from the rough wood. But he always had a quiet greeting for Beatrice when their paths crossed, a slight nod or a few words that somehow made the weight on her chest feel a little lighter. Sometimes, when she climbed the hill in the evenings, she would find him already there, sitting by his tree, keeping silent vigil. He never presumed to sit closer to Emma's grave. He maintained his respectful distance, but his presence was a comfort nonetheless. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in silence. But she was never alone with her grief, and that made all the difference. October arrived, and the aspens on the mountainsides turned brilliant gold. The nights grew longer and colder, and the first light snows began to dust the highest peaks. Truckee prepared for winter the way it did every year, stockpiling supplies and battening down against the harsh weather that would soon isolate them from the outside world. The train would still run, weather permitting, but there would be days, sometimes weeks, when the town would be completely cut off, buried under snowdrifts that could reach the rooftops. Beatrice was carrying a load of fresh linens up the boarding house stairs, when Fletcher appeared on the landing above her, returning to his room for a clean shirt before his afternoon shift at the mill. He took one look at the heavy basket in her arms and immediately descended the stairs to take it from her. "You do not need to do that," Beatrice protested. "I know," Fletcher said, already climbing back up with the basket. "Which room?" She sighed and followed him. "Third door on the left." He deposited the basket on the bed in the empty room and turned to face her. For a moment, they just looked at each other in the dim light filtering through the small window. Beatrice was acutely aware of how close he was standing, of the way his blue eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained composure. "You are doing better," he said. "It was not a question." "Some days," Beatrice admitted. "Other days I can barely remember to breathe." "That is how it goes. Good days and bad days. Eventually you get more good than bad, or at least that is what I keep telling myself." "Does it work?" A shadow crossed Fletcher's face. "Sometimes." He paused, then added, "You make it easier, knowing someone else understands." "I have not talked about Danny with anyone since I left Sacramento. People either do not want to hear it or they try to fix it, like grief is a broken wagon wheel they can just replace. But you do not do that." "Neither do you," Beatrice said quietly. "You just sit with me. You do not try to make it better or tell me how I should feel. You just understand." They stood there in the boarding house room, two broken people who had somehow found an unexpected connection in their shared pain. Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, some small crack in the ice that had surrounded her heart since Emma died. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Fletcher cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the moment. "I should get to the mill. But B, I want you to know that talking with you, sitting with you up on that hill, it has helped me more than anything has in 3 years. So thank you." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. Beatrice stood alone in the room, her heart beating faster than it should, and wondered what exactly was happening between them. Was it just shared grief, the natural gravitation of two wounded souls toward each other's pain? Or was it something more, something that felt dangerously close to the stirrings of affection she had sworn she would never feel again after Samuel left? That evening when she climbed the hill to Emma's grave, Fletcher was already there. But this time, he had brought supplies. A small fire crackled in a ring of stones, and he had spread a second blanket on the ground with a simple meal laid out. Bread, cheese, dried apples, and a canteen of water. "Figured if we are going to be up here every night anyway, we might as well be comfortable," he said with a slight shrug. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from the simple kindness of the gesture. She sat down on the blanket and accepted the food he offered, and they ate together while the fire crackled and the stars emerged overhead. They talked about their days, about the gossip at the boarding house and the near accident at the mill when a log had almost crushed one of the workers. Small talk, ordinary conversation, the kind that normal people had. It felt strange and wonderful and almost like being alive again. "Tell me about Emma," Fletcher said when they had finished eating. "Not about how she died. Tell me about who she was." So Beatrice did. She told him about Emma's stubborn insistence on wearing her favorite blue dress even when it was dirty. About the way she would sing to herself in a made-up language while she played. About her inexplicable fear of chickens and her absolute delight in thunderstorms. She told him about the time Emma had sneaked a frog into the house and it had escaped, leading to an hour-long hunt under furniture and around corners. She told him about Emma's hugs, fierce and unrestrained, and her kisses that always landed slightly off-center on Beatrice's cheek. Fletcher listened with complete attention, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight, and when she finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "She sounds like she was remarkable," he said. "I wish I could have met her." "Tell me about Daniel," Beatrice said. So he did. He told her about a boy who loved horses more than anything, who could spend hours in the stable just watching them. About Danny's determination to learn everything his father knew about riding and roping and caring for cattle. About his terrible habit of leaving his boots wherever he took them off, driving his mother to distraction. About the way he would fall asleep during bedtime stories, fighting to keep his eyes open because he did not want to miss the ending. About his laugh, loud and unrestrained, and his curiosity about how everything worked. They talked late into the night, the fire burning low, wrapping their grief and their memories around each other like a blanket. And somewhere in the midst of it, Beatrice realized that this was healing. Not forgetting, never forgetting, but learning to carry the loss without being crushed by it. Learning that it was possible to remember Emma with love and not just pain. Learning that she could still be herself, still have conversations and thoughts and feelings that did not revolve entirely around the grave on the hillside. November came with cold winds and gray skies that promised snow. Beatrice had been working at the boarding house for over a month now, and her body had adjusted to the physical labor. Her hands were rough and red from washing linens in hot water, and her back ached at the end of each day, but she was earning enough to keep food on her table and wood in her stove. Mary had proven to be a fair employer, gruff but generous, and the other boarders treated Beatrice with respectful courtesy now that she was part of the household staff. Fletcher had become a fixture in her life, as constant as the mountains that surrounded the town. They still met on the hillside most evenings, though the fire had become a necessity rather than a comfort as the temperatures dropped. They had fallen into an easy companionship, talking about everything and nothing, finding comfort in each other's presence. Beatrice found herself looking forward to seeing him each day, found herself noticing small things about him. The way he would unconsciously rub at a scar on his left hand when he was thinking, the slight crinkle that appeared at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the careful gentleness with which he moved despite his size and strength. She tried to tell herself it did not mean anything. They were just two people helping each other through a difficult time, but her heart knew better. She was falling for Thomas Fletcher, this quiet cowboy who had sat with her in her darkest moment and shared his own pain. She was falling despite all her promises never to let anyone close again. She was falling even though the thought of loving someone and potentially losing them terrified her more than she could express. One evening in mid-November, as they sat by their fire on the hillside, the first real snow of the season began to fall. Light flakes drifted down from the dark sky, catching the firelight as they spiraled toward the ground. Beatrice held out her hand and watched the snow melt against her palm. "We will not be able to come up here much longer," she said. "Once the heavy snows start." "No," Fletcher agreed, "but spring will come eventually. It always does. I do not know what I will do when I cannot come up here every day. It feels like abandoning her all over again." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then turned to face her fully. Emma is not up here. I know that probably sounds cold, but it is the truth. Her body is in the ground, but she, the little girl who loved butterflies and was afraid of chickens, she is in your heart, in your memories. You carry her with you wherever you go. Coming up here is not about her. It is about you needing a place to grieve. And that is fine. That is good even. But you do not have to worry about abandoning her because you never could. She is part of you. Tears streamed down Beatrice's face, hot against her cold cheeks. "How do you know that?" "Because I know now that Danny is part of me. I spent 2 years trying to run from his memory, taking jobs in places where no one knew I had ever been a father, never talking about him, acting like if I just kept moving, the pain would somehow stay behind. But it did not work. He was always with me. It was not until I met you, until I started talking about him again, that I realized I did not have to run. I can carry him with me. I can love him and miss him and still keep living. You taught me that. I did not teach you anything, Beatrice whispered. You have been teaching me how to survive this. Fletcher reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. Then I guess we have been teaching each other. His hand lingered on her face, warm despite the cold air. Beatrice found herself leaning into his touch, craving the comfort of human connection after so many months of isolation and grief. Fletcher's blue eyes were dark in the firelight, filled with an emotion that made her heart race. "Bea," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I need you to know that what I feel for you, it is not just about shared grief or understanding. Somewhere along the way, you have become important to me, more important than I planned, more important than is probably wise. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if you need me to step back, I will. But I had to tell you." Beatrice felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath her feet. She could step back, could retreat into the safety of her grief and her solitude. Or she could step forward into the terrifying unknown, into the possibility of feeling something other than loss. "It does not make me uncomfortable," she heard herself say. "It terrifies me, but it does not make me uncomfortable, because I feel it too. I did not want to. I tried not to. But somewhere between that first night when you sat with me and now, you have become the best part of my days. And that scares me more than anything, because what if I lose you too? What if I let myself care and then you leave like Samuel did, or you die like Emma did, and I have to go through this all over again?" Fletcher moved closer until they were sitting side by side, their shoulders touching. "I cannot promise I will never leave or never die. Nobody can promise that. But I can promise that if I leave, it will not be because I wanted to. And I can promise that whatever time we have, however long or short, I will spend it being as honest and true as I know how to be. I will not run from grief. I will not blame you for things beyond your control. I will just be here for as long as you will have me. That is all anyone can promise," Beatrice said. She turned to look at him, at this man who had become her anchor in the storm. "I do not know if I am ready for this. I do not know if I will ever be fully ready. But I do not want to lose you either. So maybe we just take it one day at a time. One step at a time, like you said that first morning." Fletcher smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his usually serious face. "One step at a time sounds perfect." He leaned in slowly, and Beatrice met him halfway. Their lips touched gently, tentatively, a question and an answer all at once. The kiss was brief and chaste, nothing like the passionate embraces Beatrice had shared with Samuel in the early days of their marriage. But it felt right in a way that those kisses never had. It felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding warmth after being cold for too long. When they pulled apart, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what? For trusting me. For taking this chance. For being brave enough to keep living even when it seemed impossible." They sat together by the fire until the snow began to fall harder, coating the hillside in a thin layer of white. Then Fletcher walked her home, holding her hand the entire way, and kissed her once more at her door before heading back to the boarding house. Beatrice went inside and stood in the center of her small house, touching her lips where he had kissed her, and felt something she had not felt since Emma died: hope. The heavy snows came in late November, transforming Truckee into a winter wonderland of white drifts and icicles hanging from rooftops. The town settled into its winter rhythm, the population shrinking as those who could afford to leave headed to lower elevations for the season. But the core community remained. The year-round residents who worked the mills and the shops, who tended the train depot and kept the telegraph wires clear, who made their living in this high mountain valley regardless of the weather. Beatrice and Fletcher saw each other every day now. He would stop by Mary's boarding house in the mornings before his shift at the mill, sharing a cup of coffee and a few quiet words before heading out into the cold. In the evenings, since they could no longer climb the hillside through the deep snow, they would sit together in the boarding house parlor, playing cards or reading aloud from whatever books they could borrow. Sometimes Mary would join them, offering acerbic commentary on the melodramatic novels that were popular among the boarders. Sometimes they were alone, sitting close on the worn sofa, Fletcher's arm around Beatrice's shoulders, finding comfort in simple proximity. It was a chaste courtship by most standards. Fletcher never pushed for more than Beatrice was willing to give, and she was grateful for his patience. She was still healing, still learning how to be a person again rather than just a vessel for grief. But slowly, carefully, she was opening her heart to the possibility of love. Not the wild, reckless love of youth, but something deeper and more resilient. A love built on shared pain and mutual understanding, on honesty and patience and the determination to keep choosing each other even when it was hard. Christmas came, bringing with it a brief thaw and a town-wide celebration at the church. Beatrice attended with Fletcher, sitting beside him in the crowded pews while the congregation sang carols and the minister spoke about hope and renewal. It was her first Christmas without Emma, and the grief sat heavy in her chest, making it hard to breathe. But Fletcher held her hand throughout the service, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm, reminding her that she was not alone. Afterward, as they walked back through the snowy streets, Fletcher stopped outside her house. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small package from his coat pocket. Beatrice unwrapped the brown paper to find a delicately carved wooden bird, no bigger than her palm. It was a magpie, rendered in such detail she could make out individual feathers. "I made it," Fletcher said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "I am not much of a woodcarver, but I remembered you saying Emma loved birds and magpies are so common up here, and I thought maybe you could have something to remember her by, something besides the grave." Beatrice felt tears well up, but they were not entirely sad. "It is beautiful, Fletcher, truly beautiful. Thank you." She stood on her toes and kissed him, right there in the street where any of the neighbors could see. Fletcher made a soft sound of surprise but quickly recovered, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher's eyes were dark with want. "B," he said, his voice rough, "I should go. Because if I come inside right now, I am not sure I will have the willpower to leave." Beatrice knew what he was offering, what he was protecting her from. Samuel had been gone for 3 months now. By law and by custom, she was still a married woman, even if her husband had abandoned her. Any relationship with Fletcher was technically adultery, though in the rough frontier justice of Truckee, no one seemed particularly concerned about the niceties of a marriage that existed only on paper. "I am not ready yet," Beatrice admitted. "But Fletcher, I want you to know that I will be. Soon. When I am ready to let go of the past completely, you are the future I want." Fletcher smiled and kissed her forehead. "Then I will wait. I would wait forever if that is what you needed." He walked away through the snow, and Beatrice went inside, clutching the carved magpie to her chest. She placed it on the small shelf above her bed where she could see it first thing every morning. A reminder of Emma. A reminder of Fletcher. A reminder that love could take many forms and that grief did not have to mean the end of joy. January arrived with brutally cold temperatures and snow measured in feet rather than inches. The passes were completely closed now, and the train ran only sporadically when work crews managed to clear the tracks. Truckee was isolated, cut off from the rest of the world, and the town drew in on itself like a hibernating animal. Supplies ran low in the general store, and Mary put the boarding house residents on reduced rations to make their stockpile last through the winter. It was during this cold, isolated time that Fletcher asked Beatrice to marry him. They were sitting in the boarding house parlor late one evening, alone except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. The fire had burned low, and Beatrice was leaning against Fletcher's chest, his arms wrapped around her, both of them enjoying the warmth and comfort of the embrace. "B," Fletcher said quietly, "I know this might be too soon. I know you are technically still married, even though Samuel is long gone. But I want you to know that when you are free, when you are ready, I would like to marry you, properly, in front of the whole town. I want to build a life with you." Beatrice turned in his arms to look at him. "You want to marry a woman who comes with more grief than belongings, who might never be able to give you another child because the thought of losing another one is too much to bear, who still climbs a snowy hillside to sit by a grave whenever the weather allows." "I want to marry you," Fletcher said simply. "All of you. The grief and the strength and the way you hum while you work and the stubborn set of your jaw when you are trying not to cry. I want mornings waking up beside you and evenings sitting by the fire together. I want to grow old with you, B. I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth making you happy, or at least helping carry the load when happiness seems too far away." "What about children?" Beatrice asked. "Do you want more children?" Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. "I would like them, yes. I like being a father, even though it ended in heartbreak. But if you cannot face that fear, if you need us to just be the two of us, then that is enough. You are enough, B. More than enough." Beatrice felt something settle in her chest, some final piece of her broken heart clicking back into place. "I think I might want to try, not right away, but someday. Because Emma would not want me to live in fear. She would want me to be brave. And having children with you, building a family with you, that would be the bravest thing I could do." Fletcher pulled her close and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "Is that a yes? Will you marry me?" "It is a yes to the future," Beatrice said. "Right now, I am still legally Samuel's wife, and I do not even know where he went or if he is alive. But if I can get free of that marriage, if there is any way to end it properly, then yes. I will marry you, Thomas Fletcher. I will build a life with you. I will be brave with you." They held each other in the dying firelight, two damaged souls who had found unexpected wholeness in each other. Outside, the wind howled around the boarding house, and snow piled up against the windows. But inside they were warm and safe, and for the first time in a very long time, happy. The winter dragged on, but Beatrice no longer minded the cold and the isolation. She had Fletcher, and that made everything bearable. They spent their evenings planning their future, talking about where they might settle when the spring came. Fletcher wanted to save enough money to buy land, maybe start a small ranch somewhere with good grazing. Beatrice talked about having a real garden, about growing vegetables and flowers, about having space and sunlight and room to breathe. They also talked about the practical problems facing them. Beatrice was still legally married to Samuel, who had vanished without filing for any kind of separation or divorce. In theory, she could petition for a divorce on the grounds of abandonment, but that required lawyers and money they did not have. Fletcher suggested they wait until spring when the passes opened, and they could travel to Sacramento to seek legal advice. In the meantime, they conducted themselves with careful propriety, aware that Beatrice's reputation was fragile enough without adding fuel to the gossip fires. February brought a break in the weather, a week of clear skies and temperatures that climbed almost to freezing during the day. Beatrice took advantage of the reprieve to climb the hillside to Emma's grave for the first time in weeks. The snow was still deep, and she had to break trail the entire way, but she needed to visit, needed to sit by that small cross and tell her daughter about Fletcher and their plans for the future. She found the grave site remarkably undisturbed, the cross still standing straight, the snow around it smooth and unmarked. Beatrice brushed the snow off a fallen log and sat, looking at that small mound that had dominated her life for so many months. "Hello, little one," she said quietly. "I am sorry it has been so long since I visited. The snow was too deep, and I did not want to risk getting lost in a storm, but I have thought about you every single day. I hope you know that." She sat in silence for a moment, listening to the whisper of wind through the pines. Then she took a deep breath and continued. "I met someone, Emma. His name is Fletcher, and he is kind and patient, and he understands about loss because he lost a little boy, just like I lost you. We are going to get married when we can, and we are going to try to build a life together. I think you would like him. He carved a little bird for me, a magpie, and it is so detailed and beautiful. He works hard and he makes me laugh sometimes, and he sits with me when I am sad and does not try to fix it." The wind picked up, sending a small swirl of snow dancing across the grave. Beatrice pulled her shawl tighter and went on. "I want you to know that loving him does not mean I love you less. You will always be my first baby, my sweet girl. But I am learning that the heart is bigger than I thought. There is room for grief and for joy, for loss and for hope. And I think, wherever you are, you would want me to be happy. You always wanted everyone to be happy. You would share your toys with the other children at church even when they had not been kind to you. You would pick flowers for me when you thought I looked sad. So I think you would understand about Fletcher. I think you would be glad I found someone to help me carry the weight." Beatrice sat with her daughter for another hour, talking about the winter and the boarding house and Mary's sharp tongue and all the small details of life that made up her days. When the sun began to dip toward the western peaks, she stood and brushed the snow from her skirt. "I will come back when I can," she promised. "But if I cannot come as often, know that it is because I am living, Emma. I am doing what you would want me to do. I am being brave." She made her way back down the hillside as twilight settled over the valley. Fletcher was waiting at the bottom of the hill, stamping his feet to keep warm. He must have seen her climbing up and decided to wait for her return rather than letting her walk home alone in the growing dark. "How was it?" he asked as she reached him. "Hard," Beatrice admitted, "but necessary. I told her about you, about us." Fletcher held out his hand and she took it. They walked back to town together through the blue twilight, their breath steaming in the cold air, their shoulders touching. When they reached her house, Fletcher pulled her into his arms and held her for a long moment. "I love you, Bea," he said into her hair. "I know I have not said it before, but I do. I love you." Beatrice felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it almost hurt. "I love you too." "I did not think I would ever say those words again, but I love you, Fletcher. I love you so much it scares me." "Then let us be scared together," he said, and kissed her with a passion that made her forget the cold, forget her grief, forget everything except the solid warmth of his body against hers and the taste of his lips and the feeling of being truly, completely alive. March arrived with the promise of spring, still weeks away but finally visible on the horizon. The days grew longer, the sun stronger, though snow still covered the ground and would for weeks yet. The train began running more regularly again, as work crews kept the tracks clear, and slowly Truckee reconnected with the outside world. It was on a clear morning in mid-March that Samuel Zimmerman returned to town. Beatrice was hanging laundry behind the boarding house when Mary came rushing out, her face pale. "B, you need to come inside. Right now." Something in Mary's tone made Beatrice's stomach drop. She followed the older woman into the boarding house and found Samuel standing in the parlor, looking thinner and harder than when he had left 6 months ago. His clothes were dusty from travel, and a new scar ran along his jawline. He turned when Beatrice entered, and for a moment they just stared at each other. "Beatrice," Samuel said finally. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Samuel." Beatrice felt like she was seeing a stranger. "Why are you here? I came to tell you I want a divorce." "I have been working in Virginia City, and I have met someone else. We want to get married, but I need to dissolve my marriage to you first." He pulled some papers from his coat. "I had a lawyer draw these up. You just need to sign and we can both move on." Beatrice felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her chest. After 6 months of silence, after abandoning her in her darkest hour, Samuel had returned simply to ask for a divorce so he could marry someone else. It was so absurd, so perfectly fitting his selfishness, that she did not know whether to laugh or scream. "You left me," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You left me sitting by our daughter's grave and you never looked back. And now you show up asking me to make things easier for you." "I know I handled things poorly," Samuel said, though his tone suggested he did not really believe it. "But the marriage was over anyway, Beatrice. We both know it. Emma was the only thing holding us together, and once she was gone." He shrugged, as if their daughter's death was simply an inconvenient circumstance rather than a shattering loss. Beatrice took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists. "Her name was Emma. She was a real person, not just a thing holding us together. She was bright and funny and curious, and she loved you despite how little time you spent with her. And when she died, when I needed you most, you ran. So do not stand here now and pretend you handled things poorly. You destroyed me, Samuel. You left me to grieve alone." "I am sorry," Samuel said, though he did not sound sorry. "But that does not change anything. I want a divorce. I need a divorce. Will you sign the papers or not?" Beatrice looked at the documents he held out, at the legal language that would formally end their marriage. 6 months ago, even a month ago, she might have hesitated, might have felt some twinge of loyalty to the vows she had made. But now, loving Fletcher and planning a future with him, there was no hesitation at all. "I will sign," she said, "but first I need you to sign something too." She walked to the small writing desk in the corner and pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. Quickly, she wrote out a simple statement. "I, Samuel Zimmerman, relinquish all claim to the house located at the northern edge of Truckee, California, and transfer full ownership to Beatrice Zimmerman." She dated it and held it out to Samuel. "The house was built with your labor, but I helped pay for the materials with money from my sewing. I have been living there alone and paying to maintain it for 6 months now. If you want this divorce, you sign over the house to me. It is not much, but it is all I have." Samuel scowled but took the pen. "Fine, I do not want the house anyway. Virginia City is where my life is now." He scrawled his signature across the bottom of the paper, then thrust the divorce documents at her. "Your turn." Beatrice took the papers and read through them carefully, making sure there were no hidden clauses or unexpected terms. It was straightforward enough. A dissolution of marriage on the grounds of mutual desire to separate, with no property disputes or financial obligations on either side beyond what she had already secured. She signed her name at the bottom, and just like that, her marriage to Samuel Zimmerman was over. "I will file these in Sacramento," Samuel said, gathering the papers. "It will take a few weeks to become official, but we are done, Beatrice. You can move on with your life now." "I already have," Beatrice said coldly. "I moved on the moment you rode out of town without looking back. I moved on when I found someone who actually understands what it means to grieve. I moved on when I learned that I was stronger without you than I ever was with you. So go back to Virginia City, Samuel. Go marry your new woman, and I hope you treat her better than you treated me and Emma." Samuel flinched at the accusation, but he did not argue. He simply turned and walked out of the boarding house, leaving Beatrice standing in the parlor with Mary beside her. They watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, heading east out of town. "Good riddance," Mary said firmly. "That man was never good enough for you, Bea. I am glad he is gone." Beatrice felt a weight lift from her shoulders, one she had not fully realized she was carrying. "I need to find Fletcher. He is at the mill, but his shift ends in an hour. Go wait at your house. He will want to hear this privately, I think." Beatrice hugged Mary impulsively, then hurried home. She paced her small house, too agitated to sit still, clutching the paper that gave her ownership of her home. When Fletcher finally knocked on her door, she flung it open and threw herself into his arms. "He came back," she said breathlessly. "Samuel came back. He wants a divorce because he met someone else in Virginia City, and I signed the papers, Fletcher. I signed them and I got the house and we are free. As soon as the divorce is official, we can get married properly. We can have the life we have been planning." Fletcher held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "Are you all right? I know it must have been hard to see him again." "It was easier than I thought," Beatrice admitted. "He is a stranger to me now. Whatever I felt for him died when he left me by Emma's grave. You are the one I love. You are the one I choose, now and always." Fletcher pulled back just enough to kiss her, deep and thorough, pouring all his relief and joy into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "As soon as those papers are official, marry me. I do not want to wait another day longer than we have to." "Yes," Beatrice said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you. I will marry you and build a life with you and be brave with you for the rest of our days." They held each other in the doorway of her small house while the spring sun streamed down and the snow began its slow retreat from the valley. The worst of the winter, both literal and metaphorical, was behind them now. Spring was coming, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings and second chances. The divorce became official in early April, processed through the Sacramento courts with remarkable speed. Fletcher and Beatrice were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Truckee church, with Mary standing up as witness and most of the boarding house residents in attendance. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that she had sewn herself, and Fletcher wore his best shirt and a new vest purchased especially for the occasion. The minister kept the service brief, speaking about love and commitment and the courage it took to open your heart again after loss. When Fletcher slipped the ring onto Beatrice's finger, a simple gold band he had bought from the jeweler in town, she felt Emma's presence like a blessing. Her daughter would have loved this, would have danced around in excitement at seeing her mother in a pretty dress. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her entirely. She was Beatrice Fletcher now, ready to start a new chapter of her life with the man she loved. Their wedding night was tender and careful, both of them nervous despite their ages and previous marriages. But Fletcher was patient, taking his time, making sure Beatrice felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together, it felt like a homecoming, like two pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Afterward, they lay tangled in their bed now and talked about the future until the sun began to rise. "I have been saving money," Fletcher said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Beatrice's bare shoulder. I have enough now to make a down payment on some land. There is a property about 10 miles north of here, up near the Truckee River with good grazing and timber. The owner is looking to sell. I thought we could go look at it next week, see if it feels right." Beatrice smiled against his chest. "A ranch of our own. It sounds perfect. It will be hard work, building a house, clearing land, starting a herd, but we could do it together, make something that is ours." "I am not afraid of hard work," Beatrice said. "And building something new sounds exactly right, something that is not haunted by the past. Something we create together." They looked at the property the following week, riding out on 2 horses borrowed from the livery stable. It was beautiful. A wide meadow bordered by pine forest, with the Truckee River running along the southern edge, providing fresh water year-round. There was even a small cabin already built, rough but sturdy, that would give them shelter while they constructed something larger. "What do you think?" Fletcher asked, watching Beatrice's face carefully. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the mountains rising in the distance, the clear blue sky, the meadow just beginning to show the first green shoots of spring. "I think it feels like home." They made an offer that afternoon, and by the end of April the land was theirs. Fletcher gave notice at the mill, and Beatrice told Mary she would be leaving the boarding house. Mary grumbled about losing her best worker, but gave them a handsome wedding gift, a set of sturdy dishes and a quilt she had stitched herself. "You write to me," Mary ordered Beatrice on the day they left. "Let me know how you are doing up there. And if that husband of yours does not treat you right, you come straight back here, you understand?" "I understand," Beatrice said, hugging the older woman. "Thank you, Mary, for everything. For giving me work when I needed it most. For checking on me. For being my friend." "Go on now," Mary said gruffly, wiping at her eyes. "You are making me soft in my old age." Fletcher and Beatrice moved to their new property in early May, loading their few possessions onto a wagon and making the journey north. The cabin was small and drafty, but it was structurally sound, and Fletcher immediately began making improvements. He chinked the gaps between the logs, repaired the roof, built a proper door to replace the hide that had been hanging there. Beatrice planted a garden, turning over the soil and planting seeds for vegetables and herbs. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side from dawn until dusk, exhausted but happy. In June, Fletcher brought home their first cattle, a dozen head purchased from a rancher who was selling out and moving back east. The animals were half wild and skittish, but Fletcher worked with them patiently, and gradually they settled into their new home. He talked about building the herd over the years, about eventually having enough cattle to make a real profit. Beatrice listened to his plans and added her own. Chickens for eggs, maybe a milk cow, fruit trees if they could get them to survive the harsh winters. They talked about Emma and Daniel often, no longer afraid of the grief those conversations might bring. Fletcher built a small cairn of stones near the cabin, a memorial to the children they had lost. They would stand there together sometimes in the evenings, remembering, honoring, keeping their lost ones close even as they built their new life. In late July, Beatrice realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then told Fletcher over dinner one evening. "I think I might be with child," she said quietly, watching his face carefully. Fletcher's fork clattered to his plate. "You are sure?" "Not completely, but fairly certain. I know we talked about this, about whether we wanted to try, but Fletcher, I am terrified. What if something happens? What if I lose this baby too?" Fletcher came around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Then we will grieve together and we will survive it together, just like we have survived everything else. But B, you cannot live your life in fear of what might happen. Emma would not want that for you. Danny would not want it for me. We have to be brave enough to try. And whatever happens, we face it together." Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Together," she repeated. "All right, we will be brave together." The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down, and the fear of losing another child haunted her days and nights. But Fletcher was endlessly patient, holding her when she cried, rubbing her back when she was ill, reassuring her that everything would be all right even when she could not believe it herself. As her belly began to swell with obvious pregnancy, they made the journey to Truckee to see the doctor. He examined Beatrice thoroughly and declared both mother and baby healthy, which eased some of her fears but did not eliminate them entirely. The doctor recommended she take things easy for the remainder of her pregnancy, advice that proved difficult to follow on a working ranch. But Fletcher took over the heavier chores, insisting that Beatrice rest whenever possible. The winter of 1879 was milder than the previous year, with less snow and warmer temperatures. Beatrice's pregnancy progressed without major complications, though her anxiety increased as her due date approached in late February. She made Fletcher promise that if anything went wrong, if she had to choose between her life and the baby's, he would save her. He held her close and promised, though she could see the pain in his eyes at the thought of having to make such a choice. The labor began on a cold morning in late February, almost exactly a year after Beatrice and Fletcher had been married. The contractions started slow and built gradually, giving Fletcher time to ride to Truckee and fetch the midwife, Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in the county. She was a small, efficient woman who took charge of the situation immediately, sending Fletcher to boil water and gather clean linens while she examined Beatrice. "Baby is positioned well," Mrs. Chen announced. "This will take time, but I see no cause for worry. You are doing fine." The labor lasted through the day and into the evening. Beatrice had forgotten how much it hurt, had forgotten the bone-deep exhaustion, and the way pain could wipe away every thought except the desperate need to make it stop. But Mrs. Chen was experienced and calm, coaching her through each contraction, and Fletcher held her hand the entire time, offering quiet encouragement and refusing to leave even when she yelled at him during the worst of the pain. Finally, as the sun was setting, Beatrice felt the overwhelming urge to push. Mrs. Chen positioned her carefully and guided her through the final stage of labor. Beatrice pushed with every ounce of strength she had left, and suddenly the pressure released and a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A son," Mrs. Chen announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy son." Beatrice fell back against the pillows, exhausted and crying and laughing all at once. Fletcher was crying too, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the baby. Mrs. Chen cleaned the infant efficiently, wrapped him in a blanket, and placed him in Beatrice's arms. The baby boy was red-faced and furious at his sudden eviction from the womb, his cries loud and healthy. Beatrice stared down at him in wonder, at his tiny fists and his shock of dark hair and his eyes that were trying to focus on her face. A son. She had a son. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Fletcher leaned over her shoulder, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "He is perfect, Bea. Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy but had never been able to decide. Now, looking down at her newborn son, Beatrice suddenly knew. "Daniel," she said. "Daniel Thomas Fletcher. After both the boys we lost." Fletcher inhaled sharply, his eyes meeting hers. "Are you sure? I thought you might want to avoid that, to not have the reminder." "It is not a reminder of loss," Beatrice said. "It is honoring them both, your Danny and my Emma. This baby is a new life, a new beginning, but he carries with him the memory of the children who came before. I think that is beautiful." Daniel Thomas Fletcher, Fletcher repeated, testing the name. I like it. I like it very much. He kissed Beatrice's forehead, then the baby's. Welcome to the family, Daniel. We are going to love you so much. Mrs. Chen stayed through the night, making sure both mother and baby were stable before she would consider leaving. In the morning, Fletcher paid her generously and drove her back to Truckee in the wagon, promising to come fetch her again if there were any problems. But there were no problems. Baby Daniel was healthy and hungry, nursing eagerly and sleeping in short bursts between feedings. Beatrice was exhausted and sore but recovering well, her body remembering the rhythms of new motherhood even after 5 years. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, and the constant worry that something might go wrong. But as Daniel grew stronger, as he began to focus his eyes and respond to voices and develop a personality beyond eating and sleeping, Beatrice felt her terror slowly ease. This baby was thriving. This baby was going to survive. Spring came to the Sierra Nevada, melting the snow and bringing green grass and wildflowers to the meadow. Beatrice would sit on the porch of the cabin with Daniel in her arms, watching Fletcher work with the cattle, feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible. The grief was still there, would always be there. She thought of Emma every day, of what she would have been like at 9 years old, of how she would have loved having a baby brother. But the grief no longer consumed her. It existed alongside the love and the joy and the simple pleasure of watching her son grow. In late April, Beatrice and Fletcher made a journey to Truckee with baby Daniel, stopping first at Mary's boarding house. Mary cooed over the baby with surprising gentleness, declaring him the handsomest child she had ever seen. They stayed for lunch, catching up on town gossip and sharing stories of ranch life. Then, as the afternoon sun began to slant toward evening, Beatrice asked Fletcher to drive them up to the hillside cemetery. They had not been back since before the wedding, had not visited Emma's grave in over a year. Beatrice felt a flutter of nervousness as they climbed the hill, Fletcher carrying Daniel while she walked beside him. What if she had stayed away too long? What if Emma felt forgotten? But the grave was just as she remembered it, the cross still standing straight, though weathered by another year of mountain weather. Someone, probably Mary, had placed fresh wildflowers in a jar beside the cross. Beatrice felt her throat tighten with gratitude. She knelt beside the grave while Fletcher stood behind her, Daniel cooing softly in his arms. "Hello, Emma," Beatrice said quietly. "I have missed you so much. I am sorry I have not been to visit. Life has been very full and the journey is hard with a baby, but I think about you every single day. I tell stories about you. I show Daniel the carved magpie that Fletcher made and tell him it is from his sister in heaven." She paused, gathering her courage for what she needed to say next. "I want you to meet your brother, Emma. His name is Daniel, and he is 2 months old now. He has dark hair like your Papa Samuel, but he has my eyes. He is healthy and strong, and he cries so loud when he is hungry that you would laugh. I think you would have loved him. I think you would have been such a good big sister, teaching him things and playing with him and making him laugh." Fletcher knelt beside her and carefully placed baby Daniel in her arms. The baby looked around with wide, curious eyes, taking in the pine trees and the mountains and the wooden cross. Beatrice held him close, one hand on Emma's grave, connecting past and present, loss and hope. "I am happy, Emma," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I did not think I would ever be happy again after you died. But I am. I have Fletcher who loves me and understands me. I have Daniel who makes every day an adventure. I have a home and a future and so much love in my life. And I truly know that you would want this for me. You would want me to live and love and find joy again. So that is what I am doing. For you, For me, for all of us. She sat by the grave for a long time, holding her living son, mourning her lost daughter, feeling Fletcher's solid presence beside her. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and finally Beatrice stood. "I love you, Emma," she said. "I will always love you. But I have to go now. I have to take care of your brother. I have to build a life with Fletcher. I have to keep living. But you are always with me, little one. Always." They walked back down the hillside together as the stars began to emerge overhead. Daniel fell asleep in Beatrice's arms, exhausted from his first big outing. They spent the night at Mary's boarding house, then drove home the next morning, back to their ranch and their animals and their life together. The years unfolded like the pages of a cherished book. Daniel grew from a baby to a toddler to a rambunctious boy who loved horses and helping his father with the cattle. When he was 3, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Catherine, and 2 years after that, another son they called William. Each pregnancy was easier than the last, as Beatrice learned to trust her body and to believe that not every child would be taken from her. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Fletcher proved to be a skilled cattleman, and the herd grew larger each year. They hired help during the busy seasons, young men looking to learn the ranching trade. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, with real glass windows and a stone fireplace and enough bedrooms for all 3 children. Beatrice's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and extra to sell in town. She raised chickens and learned to make cheese and became known throughout the county for her excellent preserves. They made the journey to Truckee several times a year, always stopping at Emma's grave. As the children grew old enough to understand, Beatrice told them about their sister who had died before they were born. She showed them the carved magpie that Fletcher had made and told them stories about Emma's love of butterflies and her fear of chickens and her fierce hugs. Daniel, Rose, and William grew up knowing they had a sister in heaven, that she was part of their family even though they had never met her. Fletcher never returned to Sacramento to see his wife, who was now his former wife. But he heard through mutual acquaintances that she had remarried and seemed content. He was glad for her, glad that they had both found a way to move forward from the tragedy that had broken them. But his heart belonged entirely to Beatrice and the life they had built together. On a warm evening in June of 1886, 7 years after Daniel's birth, Beatrice and Fletcher sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were asleep inside, Daniel at 7, Rose at 4, and William just turned 2. The cattle were settled for the night, and the chickens were locked safely in their coop. The day's work was done, and they had these few precious moments of peace before exhaustion pulled them to bed. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked, leaning against Fletcher's shoulder. "Taking a chance on me, marrying a grieving widow with nothing to offer but pain and a tiny house." Fletcher wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Bea. You and our children, this ranch, this life. It is everything I never knew I needed." "I love you," Beatrice said. "I loved you from that first night when you sat with me on the hillside and did not try to fix my grief, just shared your own. I love you more now than I did then, which I did not think was possible. You saved me, Fletcher." "We saved each other," Fletcher corrected gently. "I was just as lost as you were, just running instead of sitting still. You taught me that it was okay to stop, to feel the pain, to carry it without letting it destroy me. We healed together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the soft sound of William crying out in his sleep, then settling again. Their life was far from perfect. The ranch work was hard and never-ending, money was always tight, and the children were a constant source of chaos and worry. But it was a good life, a life built on love and mutual respect and the shared understanding of how precious and fragile happiness could be. "I visited Emma's grave last week," Beatrice said, "while you were in town with the children buying supplies. I told her about William learning to walk and about Rose singing all the time and about Daniel wanting to learn to read. I told her that I was happy. I hope she knows." "She knows," Fletcher said with certainty. "I believe our children watch over us, Danny and Emma, together somewhere, making sure we are all right, and I think they are pleased with what we have built." Beatrice thought about that small grave on the hillside, about the little girl who had lived such a short but vibrant life. Emma had been dead for 8 years now, gone longer than she had been alive. But she lived on in Beatrice's heart, in the stories she told, in the way she loved her surviving children with fierce protectiveness while still being brave enough to let them take risks and grow. Emma's death had broken her, had shattered her world completely, but from those broken pieces she had somehow built something new and beautiful. "I am grateful," Beatrice said quietly, "for all of it, even the grief because it led me to you. Even the loss because it taught me to cherish what I have. I would not change anything if it meant losing this life with you." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "Neither would I, not a single thing." They sat together on their porch, two survivors who had found each other in the darkest moment and built a life together from the ashes of their grief. The mountains rose around them, ancient and unchanging. The river murmured in the distance. Inside their home, their children slept safely. And for this moment, this perfect evening, everything was exactly as it should be. As the years continued to pass, the Fletcher Ranch became one of the most respected properties in the region. Daniel grew into a capable young man who shared his father's gift with animals. Rose inherited her mother's green thumb and her fierce, independent spirit. William was the gentle one, thoughtful and kind, always the first to help a neighbor or take in a stray animal. They were good children who grew into good adults, carrying with them the lessons their parents had taught about resilience and love, and the importance of helping others through their darkest times. Beatrice and Fletcher grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies wearing the marks of years of hard work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and the knowledge that they had chosen each other every single day. They had built something lasting, something that would continue through their children and grandchildren, a legacy of love emerging from loss. And sometimes, when Beatrice was working in her garden or watching her children play, she would feel a brush of warmth against her cheek like a small hand reaching out. She would pause and smile, knowing that Emma was still with her, still part of her life in ways both seen and unseen. The grief had never fully disappeared, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet ache rather than a devastating wound. She had survived the unsurvivable. She had found love in the aftermath of loss. She had learned to be brave when being brave seemed impossible. And she had built a beautiful, full, joyful life with a cowboy who had sat with her on a hillside and shared his own pain, showing her that she was not alone, that survival was possible, that love could bloom even in the darkest soil. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.